Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for Shabbat. Thank you for all the blessings you've given to us. Pray that you would be with us, help us to walk in a way pleasing to you. Pray that you would bless this study, help it to be fruitful for you. In Yehoshua's name, amen.
Right. So we're going to kind of wrap up this part about the corruption, and we're talking a lot about grace. And I want to just add a little bit to the end of that and making a connection to how God's grace was being perverted in these days, just as it has continued to be perverted throughout time. And then we'll start. I'm not going to take up too much time with that, so we'll get into just talking about the ark and any observations you all may have. Mike's going to share a little bit of information that he's put together on the ark as well. I know, Mike, you had said something recently about that you discovered about that corruption. Was there something you wanted to add before we move on? The corruption that was in the earth?
Are you going to be talking on verse 13 at all, or?
I'm not really talking about it specifically. I'm just going to talk about how God's grace was perverted during this time. So I just figured if
Okay.
there's anything else anybody or yourself wants to add about that, the corruption that was going on, because we're going to move off of that.
Okay. Are you going to read through the rest of Genesis and then dip into some of that, or where are you going?
After this, I was going to just talk about the ark, but I can flip us over to, you said verse 13?
Yeah, I mean, if why don't you talk about the grace piece, and then I can share on verse 13 a couple of things I saw, and then
Okay.
we'll go to the arc from there.
Okay. All right, so we've talked quite a bit about the true meaning of God's grace, and we've covered the corruption and violence of the earth extensively. But now I want to look at how the perversion of God's grace was actually involved with this corruption at this time and continues to this day. So as we read this next scripture in Jude, remember how we've already read in the early part of Genesis 6 about these fallen ones who were called mighty men of old, who were in the earth at this time, and that the earth became corrupt and filled with violence. And recall that we learned a few weeks ago how the earth becomes defiled, cursed, and corrupt when its inhabitants transgress the laws, the Torah, and the commands of God. And we used scripture to support that. So we're going to go over to Jude, and we're going to read verses 1 through 16. Jude, a servant of Yehoshua Messiah and a brother of James, to the ones called in God the Father, having been set apart and having been kept by Yehoshua Messiah. Mercy and peace and love be multiplied to you. Having made all haste to write to you about the common salvation, beloved, I had need to write to you to exhort you to contend earnestly for the faith once delivered to the saints. For certain men crept in secretly, those having been of old, previously written into this condemnation, ungodly ones, perverting the grace of our God for unbridled lust, and denying the only Master, God, even our Lord Yehoshua Messiah. This verse is kind of the central portion of what we're going to focus in on, about these certain men creeping in, and they're calling them men of old, ungodly ones who are perverting God's grace. Verse 5, but I intend to remind you, you knowing these things, that the Lord, having delivered a people out of the land of Egypt, in the second place, destroyed the ones not believing. And those angels, not having kept their first place, but having deserted their dwelling place, he has kept in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of a great day, as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, in like manner to these committing fornication and going away after other flesh, laid down an example before times, undergoing vengeance of everlasting fire. Likewise, indeed, Also, these dreaming ones even defile flesh and despise rulership and speak evil of glories. But Michael, the archangel, when contending with the devil, he argued about the body of Moses. He dared not bring a judgment of blasphemy, but said, "Let the Lord rebuke you." But what things they do not know, they speak evil of, and what things they understand naturally, like the animals without reason, they are corrupted by these. So he's talking about this flesh or carnal, animalistic nature that corrupts them. Verse 11, woe to them, for they went in the way of Cain, and they gave themselves up to the error of Balaam for reward, and perished with the gainsaying of Korah. These are sunken rocks in your love feasts, feasting together with you, feeding themselves without fear, waterless clouds being carried about by winds, fruitless autumn trees having died twice, having been plucked up by the roots, wild waves of the sea foaming up their shames, wandering stars for whom blackness of darkness has been kept forever. And Enoch, the seventh from Adam, also prophesied to these, saying, Behold, the Lord came with myriads of his saints, to do judgment against all, and to rebuke all the ungodly of them concerning all their ungodly works, which they ungodly did, and concerning all the hard things ungodly sinners spoke against him. These are murmurers, complainers, leading lives according to their lusts, and their mouth speaks proud things, admiring faces for the sake of gain. Okay, so going back to verse 4, looking at what is the offense that he was warning us about here. It's stated here that certain men have crept in secretly to pervert or change the grace of God into something it's not. He exhorts us to earnestly contend for the faith once delivered to the set-apart ones, which means fight for the true faith that has been delivered to us. He then immediately says that certain men have crept in and perverted the grace of God. So then that indicates that is not the faith that was delivered to us. Not only does the verbiage here in verse 4 about fallen angels, and I think verse 6, and men of old seem to be directly pointing us to what was happening in Genesis 6, but is also telling us that the same thing was also happening here at the time that the book of Jude was written. And I will be so bold as to say the same thing is happening to this day. We were told plainly in verse 14 that Enoch prophesied about these certain rebellious men in his day and preached righteousness. So this is taking us directly back to the time right before the flood and the God's grace that was being perverted even then, and we know is still being perverted to this day, as we'll talk a little bit more about. And he's also intent on reminding us to take heed that we don't fall according to the same example of the people who God delivered from Egypt and were later destroyed because of their unbelief. And this is the very same exhortation the writer of Hebrews gave us in Hebrews chapter 3 when he said, take heed that we don't fall according to their example of sin and disbelief, which means faithlessness, and is a word that also is translated as disobedience. So to be without faith and to be disobedient is the same word. Certain men have crept in among the body of believers, eating and drinking with us. He's talking about how they're sitting among you and they're feasting with you. And what are they doing? They are changing the grace of God into something it's not. So let's consider that perhaps the reason why mankind has fallen so far away from God in the days of Noah is the same reason we have fallen so far away from him today. Because ungodly men have crept in among God's people like a tare among the wheat, disguising themselves as messengers of righteousness, and have perverted the grace of God and the liberty with which we have been called to by his grace, and using it as an opportunity for the flesh. I want to look closer at some of these Greek words in verse 4. The first one I want to look at is this word crept in secretly. So I'm going to flip over to King James Version. They translate it as crept in unawares. Thayer's definition says to enter secretly, slip in stealthily, to steal in. Strong says to settle in alongside, that is, lodge stealthily, creep in unawares. And it's kind of these two words that kind of mean to sit down among you. It definitely sounds like a wheat and tear kind of thing. Then I want to look at the word perverting. And because this is what's happening. They're doing something to God's grace. They're perverting it. King James says turning it. It's this Greek word metatheemi. It's hard to say, metatheemi. Essentially means to transfer, to exchange, to change sides, to move from one thing to another. So if we were speaking negatively from a good thing into a bad thing, that's the word pervert. It can also be translated as translate. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. Thayer says to transpose, to transfer, to change. He gives another example of to fall away or desert from one person or thing to another. Word basically means to change, turn, or it can also mean to remove, which I'm not seeing listed among here, but we'll see it elsewhere in just a minute. Because when I looked at this word in the Greek Septuagint, cross-referencing this Greek word from the New Testament into the Greek Septuagint, I found that it was used to describe the removing of landmarks. So that's why I said it can be, oh, there it is. I wasn't saying it. Remove. So that's one definition. And so this word is used in the Old Testament in regards to removing landmarks. And so I'm going to share a couple of examples of where this Greek word is used in the Septuagint. Let's see, did I write it down? Oh, I guess I didn't. So I'm going to go there. Deuteronomy 27:17. This is Deuteronomy 27 is the list of blessings and cursings. Cursed is the man that does this. Cursed is the man that does that. Blessed is the man that does this. So one of the curses in verse 17 says, cursed is he who removes his neighbor's landmark, and all the people shall say amen. And that's this word here. That's the same word that is used for pervert in the book of Jude. Another example is in Proverbs 23, we're going to look at verses 10 and 11, where it says, do not remove the old landmarks, and do not enter into the fields of the fatherless, for their Redeemer is mighty, he shall plead their cause with you. So again, this word remove, pervert, change, transfer. So I was pondering that and thinking about the spiritual application of moving or removing your neighbor's landmarks or the old landmarks. And if you remove a landmark, you're removing or changing a set boundary, and it is forbidden according to the Torah. So how much more do you suppose one will be held accountable for removing or changing the ancient boundaries that God himself has set in place, such as his grace? God has boundaries, and he has set boundaries around his people. But certain men have crept in stealthily among the body and have removed these spiritual landmarks of their neighbors by exchanging them for lies. They exchange the lie for the truth, or the truth for the lie, excuse me. I think it's important to note, though, that not all change is bad. For example, the same Greek word is also used in Hebrews and Genesis 5:24 of the Greek Septuagint to describe the changing or the translation of righteous Enoch. So I thought that was also an interesting connection to this word. Hebrews 11 verse 5 says, by faith Enoch was translated. So that's the same word as the word pervert in Jude. So as not to see death. And he was not found, he was removed, because God translated him. For before his translation, he had this testimony that he pleased God. So in this instance, Enoch was translated or changed into something better, because it appears that he was changed from the corruptible flesh into something incorruptible. However, the context of Jude is clear that this change was in a bad sense. So the translators, and some translators, chose to use that word perverting. The word pervert means to change, but in a negative sense. So men were perverting the grace of God by changing something good into something wicked. I looked up the verb pervert in Webster's 1828 dictionary, and it said it comes from the Latin word perverto, meaning to turn. And specifically, it says to turn from truth, propriety, or from its proper use, to distort from its true use or end, as to pervert reason or misdirecting it, to pervert the laws by misinterpreting and misapplying them, to pervert justice, to pervert the meaning of an author, to pervert nature, to pervert truth. Another definition was to turn from the right to the corrupt. And we know that in Genesis, the earth became corrupt. And he also even gave an example saying, as the serpent had perverted Eve by turning her from the truth. We saw also how this Greek word, metatethemi, can also mean to translate. And thinking about that, what do we know about the word translate? And how we are reading Bible translations that have been translated from one language to another, which is good, but it can also be a perversion when words of truth are changed from their proper use into an improper one. As it is written in Jeremiah 8:8, the lying pen of the scribe works falsehood. So this is why we're always encouraging you to get beyond the translations, because sometimes, whether intentionally or unintentionally, translators can pervert God's words by misinterpreting and misapplying the truth. So we could read Jude 1:4 as saying, certain men crept in secretly, translating the grace of God into unbridled lust or lasciviousness. All right, and so now I want to look at the word here translated as unbridled lust. And in the King James, it's lasciviousness, so it's a word that's pretty interchangeable. Eselgia, and it is a word that means licentiousness, sometimes including other vices, filthy, lasciviousness, wantonness. I wanted to dig a little deeper on what these words mean, licentiousness and lasciviousness. So I looked again at Webster's 1828 dictionary. And so we're reading how men have secretly not only changed God's grace into something else, but they're changing it into something filthy. And so I'm going to switch over to the internet, pull up Webster's 1828 dictionary's definition for lasciviousness. It's a noun, and it says to looseness irregular indulgence of animal desires, wantonness, lustfulness. Now that's interesting because Jude also went on to talk about these individuals with these animalistic desires. And he gives an example of Ephesians 4:19, saying, who being past feeling have given themselves over to lasciviousness. And it says a tendency to excite lust and promote irregular indulgences. So we could say that ungodly men have crept in and perverted the grace of God for indulgences of the flesh. Now, the word licentiousness, let me go ahead and put that in really quickly, is another noun. And this word says excessive indulgence of liberty, contempt of the just restraints of law, morality and decorum. The licentiousness of authors is justly condemned. The licentiousness of the press is punishable by law. He says, law is the god of wise men. Licentiousness is the god of fools. So isn't that interesting? So now we're bringing law into it and liberty. The indulgence of liberty and contempt for the just restraints of law, or if we're talking about God's law, Torah.
You know what else is
Now,
interesting looking at this picture here is we've just discovered Noah's last name. Noah Webster.
What? Oh, Noah Webster. It's all connected.
Just kidding.
And then looking at this word licentiousness in just a standard Merriam-Webster's modern day dictionary, I found it interesting as well. It says it is lacking legal or moral restraints, especially disregarding sexual restraints. But this is interesting, marked by disregard for strict rules of correctness. We know the Torah is our loving correction and discipline from the Father. I'm going to go back to Jude here. So the Torah is our loving correction and discipline from God, and it is specifically called the Torah of liberty. And God's grace gives us liberty. It gives us freedom. It is a perversion of the grace of God to say that God's grace gives us permission or freedom to live licentiously by disregarding the strict rules of correctness found in his Torah. And this is what many Christians and Christian sects teach and believe when they tell you we are no longer subject to the law of God because of the grace and the liberty we have received in Yehoshua. This is a perversion of God's grace. So we could say that ungodly men have perverted God's grace for excessive indulgences of the liberty with which we have been called to. And that is the very thing that Paul warns us against in Galatians 5:13. But before we read that, I want to first read what he says at the beginning of the chapter for a little bit of context and an example of how God's grace gets perverted by people who misread or misinterpret Paul's words. So I want to read Galatians 5:1-4. And he says, stand fast, therefore, in the liberty with which Christ has made us free, and do not again be held with the yoke of bondage. Behold, I, Paul, say to you that if you are circumcised, Messiah shall profit you nothing. For I testify again to every man that is circumcised that he is a debtor to do all the law. You who are justified by law are deprived from all effect from Messiah. You fell from grace. For we through the Spirit wait for the hope of righteousness out of faith. So this is a key verse where people will say, see, if you keep the law, you fell from grace. And I hear the serpent's voice saying, see, God knows no one can keep the law, and if you do try to keep it, you've fallen from his grace. But that's not what Paul is saying at all. And in context, Paul is specifically addressing people who say you must be circumcised to be saved. And if you think your works of law can save you from sin and death, well, what do you need a savior for? He is again telling us that you cannot be saved by works of law apart from belief, faith in Yehoshua. It is the Spirit of God who gives life. The flesh profits nothing. Context is always key. In fact, back in chapter 3 and verse 2 of Galatians, Paul asked them, did you receive the Spirit by works of law or by hearing of faith? And then in verse 5 said, it is Yehoshua who supplied the Spirit to you. Therefore, it is he who does the powerful works in you. Then going down here into verse 13, he gives us the warning not to use liberty as an excuse to sin. So we'll go down here and read 13 and 14. It says, for brothers, you are called to liberty. Only do not use the liberty for an opening to the flesh or for an opportunity for the flesh. But by love serve one another, for all the law, the Torah, is fulfilled in one word, even this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Do not pervert God's grace and the liberty we have been called to as an excuse to disregard God's rules of correctness, to indulge the flesh. And he also, as we've read before, says, shall we continue in sin so that grace shall abound? Heaven forbid. No, we're not supposed to do that. And then notice how Paul immediately spoke of the Torah and its purpose, which is to teach us how to walk in godly love. And we know Peter even warns us that there will be people who twist or pervert Paul's words as well, just as they do the rest of the scriptures, to their own destruction, saying they have been led away with the error of the lawless, those who are without God's law. I'm going to read that in 2 Peter 3, 13 through 18. But according to his promise, we look for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Therefore, beloved, looking for these things, be diligent, spotless, and without blemish, to be found by him in peace. And think of the long-suffering of our Lord as salvation, as our beloved brother Paul has also written to you according to the wisdom given to him. Also, in all his letters, speaking in them of things in which are some things hard to be understood, which the unlearned and unstable pervert, as also they do the rest of the scriptures to their own destruction. Therefore, beloved, knowing beforehand, beware lest being led away with the error of the lawless, you fall away from your own steadfastness, but grow in grace and in knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Yehoshua Messiah. To him be the glory both now and to the day of eternity. Amen. So people who believe and teach such perversions of God's words have been deceived by the deceiver, just as he turned Eve in the garden. Wanted to look at this last word here for denying. So they're ungodly ones perverting the grace of God into something wicked, to something filthy, and denying the only master God, even our Lord Yehoshua. So the word denying or neomai, to contradict, to disavow, reject, abnegate, deny, refuse. To deny someone, deny oneself, to disregard his own interests or to prove false to himself, act entirely unlike himself, to deny, abnegate, abjure, not to accept, to reject, to refuse something offered. So let's break this down. Certain men have stealthily lodged among God's people and have changed or exchanged the grace of our God into a lack of moral restraints and a contempt and disregard for God's just restraints and correction which we receive through his laws. In doing so, we are in fact contradicting and rejecting the only Master Elohim and Yehoshua Messiah, Jesus Christ himself. So let that kind of sink in for a minute. How many of us have heard this perversion of God's word? Perverting the word of God is what the devil has done from the very beginning, and that is what he's continuing to do today. How many of us have heard it said that you are no longer under the law of God because you are now under grace, rather than you are no longer under the law of sin and death because you are under grace? How many of us have heard believers regard God's grace as the opposite of God's law, rather than lawlessness being the opposite of God's law? Or that Jesus' grace has replaced his Father's law? How many of us have heard it said that if you seek to establish the law of God, you're a legalist who is trying to earn your salvation and you have fallen from grace? These are examples, modern day examples, of how certain men have crept into the body unawares and have perverted the scriptures to suit their own imaginations and carnal desires. This is what it means to insult and trample on the Spirit of grace that God has poured out upon us, as we've read many times before in Hebrews 10:26 through 31. Jude's testimony is indicating that this perversion of God's grace was happening all the way back in the beginning, and we are continuing this corruption and perversion of his grace to this day. So let's not be among those people that use the liberty we've been called to for indulgences of the flesh. So does anyone have anything they'd like to add to that before we move into talking about Noah's Ark? Any observations?
Did you want me to talk about verse 12 and 13 before we read about the ark?
Oh, yes. Thanks for reminding me. Yes.
All right. So, I know you had already kind of touched on some of this a couple of sessions ago, but I was looking at these words again and just seeing where else they were used. And I think if we take a look at some of the verses that match up with verse 12 and 13 here, kind of paints a picture around what this corruption may have looked like, right? And I think you just gave a lot of great examples of the perversion of grace, right? And I think it slips nicely into this word that's used for corrupt. So in verse 12 and 13, it says, "And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupted, for all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth." So when we look at the word corrupt, this shakath, it says to destroy, corrupt, go to ruin, decay, to pervert, spoiled or ruined, right? Some of the same words that we just were watching you talk about in the previous verses here. So I searched this word a little bit and found a couple of different verses I just wanted to run through here. So Deuteronomy 4:16, it says, this is like talking through the idolatry. And in verse 15, it says, "Therefore take heed to yourselves, for you saw no kind of likeness on the day Yahovah spoke to you in Horeb out of the midst of the fire, lest you act corruptly and make yourself graven images, the likeness of any figure, the likeness of male or female." There's a lot of these verses that we're going to see that it kind of tie into idolatry. When your father sons and sons of sons, and when you shall have remained long in the land and have dealt corruptly by making a graven image, the likeness of anything, and shall do evil in the sight of Yahovah your God to provoke him to anger. In Deuteronomy
What are you
30,
reading right there?
This is chapter 4, verse 25. It's the same idolatry section,
Mm.
just talking about the people dealing corruptly by making graven images. And then in Deuteronomy 31, 29, says, "For I know that after my death you will become utterly corrupt and turn aside from the way which I have commanded you, and evil will happen to you in the latter end of the days, because you will do evil in the sight of Yehoshua to provoke him to anger through the work of your hands." And then Psalm 53:1. "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They acted corruptly and have worked out abominable wickedness. There is not one doing good." Exodus 32:7. "And Yahuwah said to Moses, Go, get down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt are corrupted." This is the golden calf incident, right? And they've corrupted themselves. Deuteronomy 19 is the same. Ezekiel 16:47. "Yet you have not walked according to their ways, nor done according to their hateful deeds, but if they were a very little, but as if it were a very little thing, you were corrupted more than they were in all your ways." And then Malachi 2:7-8. "For the priest's lips should guard knowledge, and they should seek the law at his mouth, for he is the messenger of Yahovah of hosts. But you have turned out of the way. You have caused many to stumble at the law. You have corrupted the covenant of Levi, says Yahovah of hosts." So we get this sense of what this corruption looks like. And these people had corrupted the earth itself. And then in verse 13, we see that he says, I will destroy them with the earth. And Tracy had pointed out a while back that this word destroy is the same word, right? So they corrupted the earth, and now God is going to destroy them, corrupt them with the earth, right? So he in Genesis 2:6, we see that man, um, there went up from the earth a mist and watered the face of the ground, and Yahovah God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So he creates man from the earth, and then the earth itself becomes corrupted, and then Yahovah uses the corrupted earth to destroy them. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And what it made me think of is Romans 1:18-25. And it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against the ungodliness and the unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because the thing which may be known of God is clearly revealed within them, for God revealed it to them. For the unseen things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being realized by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, for them to be without excuse. Because knowing God, they did not glorify him as God, neither were thankful, but they became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their heart, and dishonored their own bodies between themselves, for they changed the truth of God into a lie, and they worshipped and served the created thing more than the Creator, who is blessed forever." Amen. So that section in Romans just reminded me of all the things you were just talking about, Trace, and the corruption of man and him giving them over into this corruption. And this corrupted earth is what destroyed them.
Yeah, and another thing you had mentioned specifically is that relation to how there seems to be a common theme of idolatry and making things with, the works of your hands and uh, changing the incorruptible God into something corruptible, some incorruptible thing that you made. And that's a big lesson that can go, it's overarching. It's not just literal to I made this wooden idol and I'm worshiping it. There's so much more to it, but ultimately it's this corrupting the earth and corrupting yourselves with these wicked thoughts, the imaginations, um, covetousness, things that the carnal man seeks after. So there seems to be a pretty good connection there, I think, to idolatry, which is ultimately adultery. That's the word, adultery against God.
Yeah. All right.
That's
I can
that's good.
read the rest of chapter 6 here.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything about that? Any observations? Okay, then let's go back to Genesis, and now we're gonna get off of that subject and move into um, just beginning touching on kind of like the ark itself. And chapter 7 also talks about some things about this ark and whatnot, so we'll talk more about it in that chapter as well. But Mike, why don't you go ahead and
Sure.
continue?
So, verse 14, make an ark of cypress timbers. You shall make rooms in the ark, and you shall pitch it inside and outside with pitch. And this is the way you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, and the breadth of it shall be 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window in the ark, and you shall finish it above to a cubit. And you shall set the door of the ark in the side of it. You shall make it with lower, second, and third stories. And behold, even I, am bringing a flood of waters upon the earth in order to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life. From under the heavens, everything which is in the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons and your wives and your sons' wives with you. And you shall bring into the ark two of every kind, of every living thing of all flesh, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Two of every kind shall come to you to keep them alive, of fowls after their kind, of cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind. And take for yourselves all food that is eaten, and you shall gather for yourself, and it shall be for food for you and for them. Noah did so according to all that God commanded him, so he did.
Thank you. Um, I just had a few observations about this, and then I'm gonna just see what else everybody else has to say. One observation is the word ark. The only other time that this word is used is describing Moses' ark that he was placed in the river and sent down by his mother. So that's a like a little ark that Moses was placed in as well. So that's an interesting connection. I was also looking at the word window. It says to put a window in it here in the ark. And I found it interesting because this is the only place this word is translated as window out of the 24 times the word is used in the Tanakh. Every other occurrence is translated as some form of noon or noonday, as being like the time of day when the sun would be at its brightest above overhead. And this was one example here in Deuteronomy 28:29. It says, and you shall grope at noonday as the blind gropes in darkness, and you shall not prosper in your ways, and you shall be pressed down and spoiled forever, and no man shall save you. That's the same word for window. So you should put a window in the ark. So ESV, the ESV translates this verse saying, let's see. Oh, where did it go? You shall make for your covering. Well, I guess I'm looking at something different, but I had that it says roof, but I don't see it now. So oh wait, I'm looking at the wrong verse, aren't I? Where's the window? Does anybody see it?
Are you looking at Deuteronomy 28?
No, I'm trying to look at Genesis 6. Where's the window? There it is. Okay, I lost it. It's verse 16. ESV says, instead of a window, it says make a roof for the ark. So just, getting a different idea or visual of what that might mean is that that just kind of makes a little more sense translated as roof to me, knowing the correlation to that word noon or noonday, indicating that perhaps this window for an opening would be like overhead, so that when there was light, that light would come in, the light of the sun would come in and light up the ark.
A skylight.
Yeah. And then I was just going to mention a little something about the door in the side. So it says to, let's see, set the door of the ark in its side. And then I'm going to pass it back to Mike again because he's got some neat information about this as well. And I haven't had time to really develop this much further, so I'll probably look at it a little bit more and have more to talk about next time too. But we know Messiah tells us he is the door. And so I feel like there is a certain imagery that we can see as it relates to the ark and what the purpose of the ark was. But I want to read that section when Messiah says that in John 10. So I'm going to read John 10, verses 1 through 11. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter into the sheepfold by the door, but going up another way, that one is a thief and a robber. But he who enters in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. The doorkeeper opens to him, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he puts forth his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. And they will not follow a stranger, but flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. Yehoshua spoke this parable to them, but they did not understand what it was which he spoke to them. Then Yehoshua said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he shall be saved, and go in and out and find pasture. The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come so that they may have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. So that, again, there's certain imagery we can see as it relates to the ark, because the ark was a vessel with only one way in and one way out, and that was through the door. And those who went in through the door were saved from the floodwaters and from certain death. They went in and had food and shelter, or pasture, if you will, during the storm, and they found pasture when they came out of the ark, because God provided for them. And as thinking about that idea of him being the door, and those who went in had pasture, and when they came out they had pasture, and they were saved from the flood. Wanted to look at this word pasture in John 10:9. This is our food, essentially. Thayer's definition, it's the Greek word nome, or nomi, pasturage, fodder, food, supplies for true life, growth, increase. Um, I'm not sure about that. Of evil spreading like gangrene, ulcers. That's a weird definition there, but um, Strong says pasture, that is feeding, the act of feeding, or a food pasturage and eating pasture. Okay, so it's face value. It's food for cattle type of thing. But what's interesting about this word is its root. So this is it's saying this nome or noma is the feminine of this same word. This is a feminine form of this same word, which is G3551, nomos. And I'm sure many of you know the word nomos in Greek is the word translated as law, specifically of the law, the Torah of Moses, also of the gospel. So we've got this idea of food of grazing for animals, and it is the word used for law. And you can see from here, it's always translated as law, this word. So the Torah, we know, is our spiritual food and the pasture that the good shepherd gives to his sheep. And so we go in through the door and we receive his words, and we come out into the world and we have his words here. He's constantly providing for us and giving us that spiritual food. So that's all that I have on that. So anybody want to add anything? And if not, I'm going to pass it over to Mike and let him share his screen.
I've been sharing this whole time.
What's that?
I don't know if you knew I was sharing this whole time. We couldn't see.
Oh, I thought I was sharing.
No, I just have been going to the places you're talking about.
I was going to the places you were talking about. You didn't tell me you took control of the remote. Okay, well, I'm done over here, so go ahead and share what you're.
Okay. Let's see. Let me know when you can see my slides. I just have a couple of things I saw that I thought were kind of cool. Are you able to see? I can't see you, so you're going to have to tell me.
Oh, yes.
I can see your slide.
Okay. All right. So in verse 16, you shall make a window in the ark, and you shall finish it above to a cubit, and you shall set the door of the ark in the side of it. You shall make it with lower, second, and third stories. So this word door, opening, doorway, entrance, petach, is the word in Hebrew. Tracy had mentioned in John 10 verse 9 that Yeshua says he is the door. If anyone enters by him, they shall be saved and shall go in and out and find pasture. And then Luke 11:9 makes reference to knocking. Of course, we knock on a door. I say to you, ask and it shall be given, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be open to you. And I was looking at this word a little bit closer, looking at some of the ancient Hebrew for this word. And the first letter is pe, which is the symbol for a mouth or to speak a word. And then the next letter is a tav, which is a seal or covenant. And then the final letter is a het, which is private, to separate, fence, or inner room. So I thought it was kind of interesting thinking about the door. This is something that speaks a word, and that word is a covenant that separates his people from those that are not his. So, we talked, Tracy just talked about that word pasture, right? And it being the law, that word nomos, and this door being Yeshua, is the one who would speak this word, this covenant, and allow that separation for his people. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And in the same verse, we also have the word side in the side of it. So the door is in the side of the ark. And this word is sod. And like we just discussed, the Messiah is the door, the word, the Torah, the law. The door is set in the side of the ark. And this word side is used here in the ark, but also in the side of the menorah and in the side of the Ark of the Covenant, a different kind of ark, right? So in Exodus 25, 31, and 32, you shall make a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand shall be made of beaten work, and its shaft and its branches, its cups, its knobs, and its blossom shall be from it. And 6 branches shall come out of the sides of it. 3 branches of the lampstand out of the one side, and 3 branches of the lampstand out of the other side. So this word side is the same word being used for the side of the ark where the door is. And of course, the side of this lampstand, it is the central branch or the 4th branch in from the left or the right there is a reference to the Messiah, just like the door of the ark is this reference to the Messiah. Deuteronomy 31:26. Take this book of the law and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of Yehoshua your God, so that it may be there for a witness against you. So the Torah is being put in the side of the ark. I thought that was pretty interesting as well. When we take a look at that word in the ancient Hebrew, we've got the sade, which is cat, desire, a fish hook, and then the second letter is a delet, a pathway or a door. So these 2 Hebrew letters mean to desire the door. And again, Yeshua is this door. And I kind of just got this image a while back of this ark, right? This little boat here. And we've got a picture of this menorah in the center there. And Yeshua is the doors. These are the verses we just went through. And the word sod for side, those are the 2 Hebrew letters on the right and left side of this boat here. But just thought this was an interesting picture of the door being in the side of the ark, the sides of the menorah, the side of the Ark of the Covenant being where the Torah goes. I think it's no coincidence that these 3 separate occasions are referencing side in the same way. So that was my little discovery for that particular verse.
I noticed, I think there's a correlation with how we talked about with the woman coming forth from the man's side, with the menorah coming out of these branches, coming out of the center shaft, out of its side, and Messiah's crucifixion, his side was pierced, and at that point, by his death, his bride could come forth, and I don't know, I'm just kind of seeing some connections with that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I titled this Noah's Ark, God's Refuge in a Time of Despair. Now God was very upset with mankind, and he punished the wicked upon the earth. He commissioned Noah to build an ark to save his family and all the selected creatures upon the earth. And I think we overlook that. I mean, we always know that, yeah, there was some destruction and Noah survived. But if we really think about all the souls that died in that flood, and then how they tried to go to high ground to survive and all that, and all the destruction and confusion and chaos and everything that was going on for who knows how many days or weeks while the earth filled with water. I picked this sign because I thought it was pretty unique. This is a sign posted at the Noah's Ark encounter in Kentucky. Over there, they have a real-size Noah's Ark to educate the public about this biblical story. And if you read it, if I can convince you, that being the serpent, that the flood was not real, then I can convince you that heaven and hell are not real. And heaven and hell is the grand metaphor for God's judgment. So in other words, if the serpent can convince us that the flood wasn't real, then maybe there's not any more judgment, to worry about. That's the way I look at that. So here's a typical picture that people have in their mind about the flood. Today's church, the culture has minimized the flood story of God's judgment as a happy fairy tale for children. In reality, it's a stark warning that God does not tolerate the evil behavior of mankind. So we all know the story of the ark, but we don't really focus about its key terms about judgment. We put the reality out of our minds and focus on the salvation of Noah and his family. All of humanity was judged during this event, and only 8 humans survived. We must believe that Yehovah's past judgment is a real warning to today's world. Yeshua speaks of a future judgment by our Heavenly Father. But of the day and hour no one knows. No, not the angels of heaven, but only my Father. But as the days of Noah, so shall be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. And they did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will be the coming of the Son of Man. In Hebrews, it is spoken of by the faith of Noah being warned by God of things not as seen yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. Noah stood before the people and spoke of God's coming judgment upon mankind, and they did not believe him. Second Peter speaks of Yah's previous judgments in the chapter 2. He did not spare the old world, but saved Noah of the 8, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. So in this chapter, first he spoke of the angels that had sinned, then the people condemned by Noah, because Noah was a preacher of righteousness, and then after that, Peter speaks of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Noah and his family went through the darkness of tribulation upon the earth. They did not escape it. They spent a year caring and laboring over God's creatures. After the waters subsided and the ark finally rested, Noah honored Yehovah with sacrifices. And Yah blessed Noah and his sons. He made a covenant with Noah and his sons to populate the earth, and that God revealed the rainbow as a token of his covenant not to flood the earth again. Now in Williamstown, Kentucky, Answers in Genesis has reconstructed Noah's Ark to share God's truth with all of Noah's descendants. That's you and me, folks. We are sons and daughters of Noach and Emzara. Emzara is Noah's wife. In Jubilees, it states, and in the 25th year, or 25th Jubilee, Noach took himself a wife, and her name was Emzara, the daughter of Rachel, the daughter of his father's brother, in the first year, in the 5th week, which is 12:05 a.m., and in the 3rd year, 12:07 a.m., she bore him Shem. In the 5th year, she bore him Ham, and in the 1st year of the 6th week, she bore him Japheth. So Emzara was Noah's cousin, his uncle's daughter, and Shem is the oldest son, then Ham, and then Japheth. And the term AM, Anu Mundi, is the Latin in the year of the world. So in other words, counting from the beginning of the creation of the world, it's abbreviated AM. So when we see that, 12:07 AM, 1207 years had passed since God created the earth. Now, another thing in Jubilees, it talks about, in Jubilees 5, he commanded Noah to make him an ark that he might save himself from the waters of the flood. And Noah made the ark in all respects as he commanded him in the 27th Jubilee of years, in the 5th week, and in the 5th year. And it was on the new moon of the 1st month he entered in the 6th year, in the 2nd month, on the new moon of the 2nd month, until the 16th. So a year had passed since he had been told he built the ark, and in the 16th day he was told, all we brought into the ark, the Lord closed it from the outside on the 17th even. So this follows the Genesis story, that on the 2nd month, on the 17th day, is when things began. Now I find that curious because the writing of Jubilees, the book that had been passed down and it's a very old book that was even found with the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it was around in the time of Yehoshua. They have another place where they speak of this 2nd month and the 17th day. And I found that very curious. It says, in the 1st week of the 1st Jubilee, Adam and his wife were in the Garden of Eden for 7 years, tilling and keeping it, and we gave him work, and we instructed him to do everything that is suitable for tillage. Jubilees was coming from the perspective of the angels telling Moses, and Moses wrote these things down. So this perspective of these writings that were kept is coming from a view of God explaining it to Moses. So it says here, and he tilled the garden and was naked and knew it not, and was not ashamed. He protected the garden from the birds and the beasts of the cattle, and gathered its fruit, ate, and put aside the residue for himself. And after the completion of 7 years, which would be the 8th year, which he had completed there, 7 years exactly, and in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, the serpent came and approached the woman, and the serpent said to the woman, has God commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? I just found this very interesting, that this was the day that the serpent caused Eve to sin and started trying to influence creation. And Jubilee says this was the same day, and even the account of Genesis says this was the same day that God chose to start the flood, to correct that error and that sin of creation. So in Genesis, it talks about the ark, and it says, "In this way you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth shall be 50 cubits, and the height 30 cubits. You shall make a window in the ark, and you shall finish it above to a cubit. And you shall set the door in the ark of its side, and you shall make it with a lower floor, a second, and a third story." So this idea that it's 3 floors or 3 stories tall. And those numbers, they convert to be 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, and 51 feet tall. So the ark would actually have physical characteristics that would make it longer than a football field. And when we compare the length of some other ships that we know of, it really, knowing what modern man can build, but if we go back to the days of wooden ships, you can see the size of Noah's Ark compared. It was probably one of the largest wooden ships ever built. It doesn't compare to today's modern shipbuilding, but in its time, it was a huge ship. Now, we all know that across the world, after Noah had repopulated, that along with all the different races of people, there always was a flood legend that was always told and retold until this day. They still have it recorded. And this is just a map showing some of the different places where they found the flood legends written in documents. Now, this is a physical location where they found a structure. It's in Dürpenar, Turkey, and it's actually 12 miles from the summit of Mount Ararat. It's at 6,300 feet of elevation. And its dimensions match the dimensions of the ark. Now, what has happened here in this photo, this picture, they're actually showing that the sides over the many years, the millennia, have splayed outward. So it's a little wider now that the timbers of the sides have fallen outward, but the dimension from the front to the back is exact. And they've taken many tests and done many things trying to analyze this. And there's a lot going for to be the #1 site of the location of Noah's Ark. Here's pictures of the Turkish visitor center that they put in. A man named Ron Wyatt. Ron Wyatt helped find this location, and he worked with the Turkish government to get permissions to take measurements and actually use radar. You can see the lines. This picture was taken during exclusive radar testing, and they've drawn these lines, or they laid these, I want to call them like ropes and different things across it to try to map it out. Those were the paths of his ground radar as he was going over it. And here's a picture of the machine at the time. This was done in the 80s, of the radar machine here showing the different depths that they were finding timbers and the spacing. And this is a map of what they found. It was proving that it's not just a natural structure with just a bunch of dirt. There's actually mapping out that it has a formation of mass inside of it. And here's some illustrations of the walls. Now, here, note A is showing this side of the wall that's splaying out, and these were actually tested. These are support timbers This is an illustration showing how the wood would have looked coming up on these walls, the side of the ark. And these are pointing to the timbers sticking out of the dirt. And then over here on this side of the formation, they're showing the deck joists that burst out the side when it's splayed. Also, there were rivets that were found on the site that Ron was allowed to take one of them. The Turkish government let him take one of them. He brought it back to the labs for testing in the States, and they actually went over the composition of the metal and everything. And definitely this is proof that that is not a natural structure, that it is a man-made structure. And it is true. Noah and his sons knew how to make rivets. We know that Tubal and Tubal-Cain, they were makers of different metals, and they knew how to make swords in that time. And the evil of men was they were having wars and fighting. So for Noah and his sons to be able to do metal work is not surprising at all. So this idea of finding rivets only helps confirm the fact that this truly is a vessel. Now, another unique thing they found was these drogue stones. These are they're not fully anchors, but dozens and dozens of them were hung off the side of the ark to keep the ark balanced during the storm. And a large rope would be put in here, and these are like anchors. This one is stuck in the ground. And as you can see, there was in that area, in those villages, as the ark came through into that valley and finally landed, it's sort of suspected that Noah, to get the ship to go the direction he wanted, started cutting some of those off, and they fell in different places, and they've located them. And through the time of the Byzantines, the people that believed in Christ, they started carving crosses in them because they believed in the story of Noah's Ark. And most of them have 8 crosses for the 8 survivors of the flood. So in closing, I just want to say, in the coming darkness of judgment, there will be another ark of salvation for those that believe in the God of Israel. And he is Yeshua Messiah in Hebrew, or Jesus Christ in Greek. He is the one that will lift us up above the flood waters of chaos that will come upon the earth at the end of days. And that concludes my study.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you, Keith.
You're welcome.
Great job. A lot of different paths and ideas today. Does anyone else have? Go ahead.
It's hard to say for sure about, those formations. They seem compelling. There's always somebody to say that's not accurate. So, I'm kind of on the fence about, whether it is or it isn't. It's certainly interesting to make note of and keep in mind.
Well, I know that, and I'm just saying that is the number one site that they've been able to touch and dig and try to find proof of it. I mean, they've been going up and down Mount Ararat still looking for the ark, thinking it's up at the top. But this is down in the valley, which sort of makes a little more sense. But at the same time, the idea of, how do I want to say, there are naysayers, and until they see proof, they don't want to believe in the testimony of God's word, if you follow me on that. So this is, to me, I look at this and the idea that this, even all those drogue stones, those anchor stones that are laying all through the villages, and they weigh tons. It's not like someone just placed them there. They ended up, coming from somewhere. And the idea that there is a hope of proof that in the last days God will reveal these things, whether it is through more testimony and actual outcome of, like you said, more proof being shown that, hey, finally. But you see, there's a lot of forces of evil that don't want these things revealed. So it may never be revealed properly as far as if that's the true spot or not. We got to remember we are dealing with principalities with power that do not want the truth to come out. And that goes with everything.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what we're talking about. The hiding the truth from the people is always, foremost in our adversary's mind.
Thanks. That was very cool.
I thank you.
All right. Well, I can pray and we can close out. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this time together and for our fellowship and study and ideas that we can come together and discuss. And we just pray that your word would be implanted in us and that we would bear fruit for you. I pray that you would watch over and protect us, help us to have a great week and be safe till we meet next time. In Yehoshua's name, amen.
Amen.
Thanks, everybody.
Shabbat
Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.